Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the work session. It is January 24th, 2023. We will begin with public comment on non-agenda items. Does any member of the public wish to address the council? Okay, seeing none, we will move to the auditor's report to City Council work session. Director Wade.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Councilors. This evening, Abby Hagerman and Micah Klinger, two partners at the city's audit firm, Klinger Hagerman LLC, will be joining you as the governing body to discuss matters of significance for the fiscal year 2022 audit. So tonight's work session is not about me at all. It's all about the auditors and you as the governing body. What I would add as a brief introduction is that January is a really unusual time of year to be discussing the beginning of a fiscal year audit. Our fiscal year ends on June 30, and typically our audit is wrapped up by December 31st, which is what is required by state statute. However, this year in July, our former auditor, BDO, informed us that they lacked staff sufficient to complete the audit. And I'm sure, as you know, that firm no longer has a local presence, and the replacement firm is not offering audit services. And so this is nothing that the city did wrong. They just could not provide these services anymore. And so we promptly issued an RFP. And in September, the council awarded the audit contract for fiscal years 2022 to 2024 to Klinger Hagerman. We have notified various state agencies of the reason for our delayed audit, and rest assured that we will experience no negative impacts in terms of our funding applications or our grant disbursements, because obviously we're concerned about that too. But many months ago, those agencies were informed and they've been wonderful to work with. And so we're looking forward to a normal year in finance in 2023, whatever that means. And I'll turn you over to Abby.
Welcome.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of council. Thank you so much for having us today. I'm excited to be in person since it has been virtual, what seems like for quite some time now. Now on the screen, you can see my colleague Micah Klinger on there as well. I believe our presentation will be on the screen momentarily, I think. Wonderful. All right. So thank you again for having us here today. The financial statement audit often gets a reputation that it falls to the finance department, but really it's to everyone on city council and members of management at the city. So tonight we're going to report to you, the city council, about various different items. Let's see if I can, technology right. There we go, perfect. So we're going to go over different areas inside the audit. What is an audit? What's the scope of that audit? What are the responsibilities? Not only our responsibilities as Klinger Hagerman as your auditors, but also your responsibilities as member of council. Talk about the actual audit strategy. What are we going to look at? Areas of focus that we'll be paying attention to. Our overall timeline, like Jen talked about, we're in an unusual year. So this year will not be in the usual order that we are. So we're going to talk about when we plan to get those items issued. It would be remiss if we did not talk about independence when we talk about a financial statement audit. That's kind of the key pillar. And then we'll introduce you to our audit service team as well. So as we get ready to kick things off, my name is Abby Hagerman. I am not new to the city of Laramie. I have had the, wonderful opportunity to work with the city as their auditor for many, many years. I started my experience in public accounting back in 2009 with a local firm that became a regional firm that became a national firm. And just, after gaining all those years of experience, I met my colleague and partner, Micah Klinger, while working at BDO, and we decided, gosh, we have some really great big firm experience, but we think we're missing some local values, so we stepped away to start our own firm as Klinger Hagerman. So I will turn it over to Micah for a few minutes here to introduce himself before we get into the meat and potatoes of the presentation.
Thanks, Abby. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the council. I just wanted to spend a minute just to introduce myself. My name is Micah Klinger. I actually grew up here in the state of Wyoming as well, over on the west side of the state in Star Valley. I've been in public accounting for about 16 years, with all of it focused on auditing governments. So I enjoy auditing governments, small governments all the way to large governments. I spent the majority of my career working for a large quasi-national firm called Moss Adams, where I spent most of my career in Oregon with them, working on large governments like the city of Portland and some of the large counties in Oregon. I then moved to Texas to help them start an office, and after a while I left and became an audit partner at a regional firm there in Texas, and spent a couple of years pretty much working solely on the audit of the District of Columbia. Helping lead up that audit for several years. During COVID, thought that maybe it was a good time to get out of the crazy city and move back to Wyoming with my family, and left McConnell and Jones to work at BDO, and that's where I was fortunate enough to meet Abby, and the rest is history. So thank you for having us this evening.
Thank you, Micah. So the purpose of why we're here tonight is professional standards do require us to come and talk to you about what the audit process looks like, what are responsibilities and those things. It came about because the nature of an audit, we spend a lot of time with administrative offices and we forget really those charged with governance, that's you in front of me, and management are the ones who hire us to conduct that audit. So today we're here to talk about your responsibilities and our responsibilities for when we're talking about the overseeing of the overall financial reporting process. So the scope of an audit. You guys are unique in the sense that you are a government agency, which means you have an additional component than if we were maybe looking at a for-profit entity. You also are even have one more item, which is because the city receives and spends enough federal funding that we have a third type of audit. So we're going to walk through each one of those. The first one is a financial statement audit. And the financial statement audit is where, we spend the bulk of our time. The financial statement audit is where we're auditing the financial statements of the city. This is your governmental activities, which are your general fund, specific purpose tax, capital construction funds. You also have some other non-majors. Your business type activities, that's water, wastewater, solid waste, and then the aggregate remaining. Those are smaller funds that just aren't as large. They're shown in a separate column, of course, in the financial statements. We also, inside of that, audit the disclosures of those financial statements. The City of Laramie takes pride in their financial reporting process, and the city issues an annual comprehensive financial report, the ACFR. You may have formerly known it as the CAFR, but has been renamed to the ACFR. So that's what we're looking at, and we're looking at that currently for June 30, 2022. That financial statement audit is performed under generally accepted auditing standards. So that's the financial statement audit. Because you are a governmental entity, we perform additional procedures that are a part of governmental auditing standards, and that requires us to dig deeper, and we actually go and we look at internal controls. We're considering how do they function. Micah will talk later about reliance on internal controls and how we're going to switch our audit methodology from what we've maybe seen in the past. But internal controls are key, right? They're ensuring we have segregation of duties, there's proper review and approval. So because you're a government entity and we're dealing with public funds, it's extra important. So GAS, as it's known, Governmental Auditing Standards, requires us to focus a little more closely on those internal controls. The other piece to that is laws and regulations. We need to make sure we're looking at and doing some testing to ensure that the city is compliant with laws and regulations. This could be state statute. It could be, are we paying our payroll taxes on time and filing those reports? Grant requirements, are we making sure that there's things that are bond covenants? If we've issued a bond, do we have to hold cash, or there's certain reporting requirements? So that's extra because you're a governmental entity, and that's going to be performed underneath government auditing standards. There is a separate report that we issue. We have the audit opinion, then there's also another letter that meets these standards regarding internal control and laws and regs. And the last audit that you guys receive as we encompass the whole audit that we talk about as a whole is called uniform guidance, or it could be known as the single audit. It was formerly A133. It's a lot of jargon. What does it mean? It means that the city has spent more than $750,000 in federal funding during fiscal year 22. When that occurs, we go through a process to determine, based on certain criteria, which grant programs we are going to test during the year. Once we pick those, then we work with the respective departments that are administering those grants to look at what are called directed material compliance requirements. So we're looking at, did you spend it on what you were supposed to spend it on? Did you report it timely? If you had a specific type called Davis-Bacon, if there were wage requirements, are you properly recording an asset addition if you purchase something, so on and so forth. So we look at the controls that are surrounding to ensure that the grant is being administered correctly, as well as also compliance with those requirements. So that's kind of the third piece. So it's the financial statement audit. We do the audit in accordance with government auditing standards, and then we also have the uniform guidance. So you guys have all three of those pieces together. When we come in at the end and we have the very pretty report that's all combined, it's 3 reports total where we're giving our 3 opinions. So responsibilities, it's easy to, when the auditors show up, we go and we dig around in different departments, and we don't come into here until the beginning and then at the very end. But we have to remember that the responsibility for the audit process is all throughout the year, and it's management and those charged with governance. So you guys as members of City Council. You're responsible for helping ensure that the city has designed and implemented their processes and policies so that financial statement reporting is fair in its presentation. It's not misleading or inaccurate for bond holders, for anyone, for your granting agencies and so forth. So it's about making sure that that process is in place. You're making sure that the city is following laws and regulations that we talked about a little bit earlier. Also, we're making sure we're in compliance with any requirements. That could be on a bond or a grant or any special funding that we might receive. It's also, this list kind of continues, it would be your responsibility, and really I would hope it would be the tone at the top that anyone inside of the city would make sure that they tell the auditors or an appropriate individual within inside the city if they have any knowledge of known or suspected fraud that could be affecting the government. That could be fraud, waste, or abuse. Those things are kind of all encompassing there. And then we need to make sure that the information that is being disseminated and passed around from the city is actually reliable and properly reported. This is kind of a condensed version. When we issued our engagement letter, which is the formal contract that we signed, it gives the exhausted list of, what actually is every single line item of your responsibility when it comes to the financial statement audit. Obviously, this is not a one-way street. We also have responsibilities too. Our responsibilities as auditors is that we're going to express an opinion using the professional standards about whether or not the city's financial statements are presented fairly in all material respects in conformity with generally accepted accounting standards. So that's GAAP, if you've heard that in the past. Our audit of the financial statement does not relieve you, those charged with governance, of your responsibility when it comes to the fair presentation of the financial statements of the city. So we've talked about responsibilities, what opinions are we going to issue? So the next question, of course, then is how are we going to actually do it, and what is our audit strategy? So I'm going to turn it over to Micah at this point in the presentation to walk us through some of those aspects.
Thank you, Abby. I'll spend just several minutes going through kind of our audit strategy or our audit process as it relates to the fiscal year 22 audit of the City of Laramie. As you can see on the slide that's up in front of you, an audit includes examining on a test basis evidence supporting the amounts and disclosures in the financial statements. Therefore, as a result of that, our involvement does involve judgment about the number of transactions to be examined and the areas to be tested. We feel that it's important to point that out. Sometimes people wonder what the auditors do. We are providing, as part of our audit opinion, reasonable assurance that the financial statements are materially correct or accurate, and not absolute assurance. And that's kind of the distinction, that we're not looking at every single transaction that was affected by the city throughout the fiscal year, as we would be out with you nonstop. And I don't know that Jen and her team would be very happy if we were out there all year round. And so as a result, we do select certain transactions based off of a risk assessment process as part of our plan. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the upcoming slides. Moving on to the next slide, we start our audit by obtaining an understanding or updating our understanding of the entity and its environment. This includes taking a heavy look at internal controls as it relates to the city for the key audit areas, such as, yeah?
Could I have you speak just a little bit louder?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Hey, that's better. It's like a bad Verizon commercial. That's much better.
Sorry about that. I'll just repeat myself just slightly then. As I was saying, as part of the audit, we do take a heavy look at the internal controls and the key financial statement areas for the city. Not only are we required to make an initial assessment of those internal controls to ensure that those internal controls are properly designed and implemented, under the auditing standards, we are allowed to also gain some assurance or fill up our audit bucket, if you will, in key areas such as payroll or regular disbursement, non-payroll disbursements by testing samples of internal controls. That's one area that I wanted to just point out that will be a little bit different in our strategy this year compared to the prior auditors. You know, with cities the size of the city of Laramie, usually your controls are quite robust and quite strong, and so it can cause us to have a more effective and efficient audit if we choose to test internal controls. That historically has not been the case with the prior auditors at the city of, for the city of Laramie. They did not take an internal control heavy focus and tested, they did not test samples of internal controls. Rather, they did more of what we call substantive testing or test of transactions, you know, looking at a bunch of invoices towards the tail end of the audit. And so that is the one thing that will be significantly different this year, is we will be testing internal controls over payroll. We'll be testing internal controls over non-payroll transactions, in addition to certain other areas. One final thing I just want to point out here is that as part of these risk assessments of looking at your internal controls, we utilize this to help us design the timing and nature and extent of our substantive procedures. And what we mean by substantive procedures, those are the types of procedures where we are looking at individual transactions within financial statement areas or cycles, where we're performing substantive analytical procedures. You know, do the amounts seem to be accurate based off of various variables or inputs that we have. Material misstatements may result from the four things that you see on your slide. They may potentially result from errors, fraudulent financial reporting, misappropriation of assets, or potentially violations of laws or governmental regulations. And so as part of our audit, we do design our audit procedures to try to flush anything out that would be considered a material misstatement for one of these reasons. If we can move on to the next slide, Abby.
I'm trying. Oh, nope.
No, you're good.
Okay, I think that one's good.
One thing that we like to communicate at the beginning of the audit is we generally communicate any significant issues or findings at the conclusion of the audit. However, at times, although I don't believe this has ever been the case with the city of Laramie, there may be challenges in obtaining information or challenges in working through certain areas of the audit. If we were to have any such issues as part of our audit, then we would communicate something further to gain assistance for the areas that we were unable to kind of work through. We don't anticipate that. Lastly, we will also communicate near the end of the audit any internal control related matters that are required to be communicated under professional standards. And before we move on to the next slide, I just want to kind of spend a minute or two more just discussing the idea of finding. Oftentimes that's, I think Abby mentioned earlier, as accountants, we like to throw out jargon. That is one of the pieces of jargon that we throw out as findings or potential issues. Just to explain that a little further, is what a finding typically is comprised of or consists of. It's usually related to some type of internal control matter or issue that we identified as part of our audit process, or potentially non-compliance with applicable laws or regulations or grant agreements. Oftentimes you'll see findings come out, be the result of the testing of the single audit or those federal grant funds, where there potentially at times can be instances of non-compliance that are identified, or at times, just as I mentioned earlier, if there are potential issues that are found with internal controls. Usually those types of findings relate to lack of segregation of duties potentially, or lack of evidence that certain reviews may be occurring, those types of things. To delve a little deeper into this, I just wanted to kind of give you a brief history of what findings have looked like for the city of Laramie. Last year, for the fiscal year 21 audit, there was a finding that was reported related to a calculation at the city, an IBNR calculation. I think it was kind of an interesting finding in regards to Abby, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that. It was one of those where, the predecessor auditor pushed a little bit on something and kind of made something a little bigger than maybe we would have initially thought.
Yeah, so the IBNR, that's incurred but not reported. This was specifically talking about your self-insured health insurance fund, trying to figure out when the year ends. Obviously, the doctor's visits have happened, but claims have not yet been issued back. It becomes a very complicated calculation associated. There's actuarials involved and all of that. Certainly, this was a matter that, the process had been the same year over year. Certainly nothing was wrong with the way that the process had been completed. It just came to, BDO's attention in the prior year that there was the way that we had calculated something versus the way the city had calculated something, neither one right nor wrong, did result in a difference in a number from a prior period. So that was issued. I would say that type of finding is, only comes around every once in a while. It certainly is no reflection upon your finance department or the administration. This is the nuances and tiny intricacies of financial statement reporting. So that one certainly gives me zero rise for concern. It happens when there's new accounting pronouncements sometimes, and just the complexity of things, which Micah will talk about when we talk about risk. Where are the areas inside of financial reporting that are just inherently more complex? And so this was an area last year that was identified and has since been corrected. And as a part of our current year audit, we'll verify and look at the work that had been done. So I don't anticipate seeing that finding again.
And to just provide an additional frame of reference for this, the city of Laramie did not have any reportable findings in any of the 4 annual audits prior to last year's audit. Abby and I just last year, before we started our firm, we were quite involved with the city and county of Denver's audit. And I think they ended up issuing 18 or 19 findings last year as part of that audit. And I bring that up just to kind of juxtapose or share with you. I mean, it is not abnormal for mid-sized to large cities to have findings. In fact, it's quite typical. And looking at the history of the city of Laramie, it really is a testament to the team that you have in place and the internal controls that you've had in place to only have had one finding over the last 5 years. If we move on to the next slide. Our audit planning focuses on areas with higher risk of material misstatement, whether due to error, fraud. You can see some bullet points here, and this will go into the next slide. We'll go through them just really quickly, and then I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about the risk assessment and what that means. Oftentimes we can hear the term higher risk or risk assessment, and it can be kind of scary as well, kind of similar to the term findings. And I just want to point out that this is part of every audit that we perform. Is we're required under the audit standards to go through and perform a risk assessment, which is, look at every potential area where there could be misstatement and assign different levels of risk. And as auditors, we focus and this helps us design our audit procedures, but it also helps us focus and spend additional or more time in areas that we deem to be of higher risk or significant risk compared to areas that may end up having a lower risk assessment. As you can see here, some of the things that we evaluate as part of that risk assessment, which helps us design our audit procedures, any prior year audit results together with current year preliminary analytical reviews. So we'll take current year numbers, we'll compare those to the prior year numbers. Are we seeing big differences or fluctuations? Are there good explanations for those? If there are big differences, then we focus heavier in those types of areas. Though that part of our of gaining understanding of the entity and the changes in the current year, it highly involves inquiries of management and other people at the city. We also look at the inherent risk within the city. Inherent risk is just kind of the risk that exists if you look through the lens that internal controls were not present. Obviously, you do have internal controls, but it just points out that there are specific areas within the city, and we'll talk about a couple of those that may be of a higher inherent risk compared to other areas, and that it may be different at the city of Laramie what we deem to be of higher inherent risk compared to the city of Casper, the city of Riverton, and so forth. We also evaluate recent developments within the industry, any regulatory environment, and general economic conditions. Oftentimes, if things are tough and there's a pinch on taxes, or different areas, that can cause us to have to focus in certain areas and spend more time. We also look at recently issued and effective accounting and financial reporting guidance, of which I believe we have a good example of that on here in 2 slides. Abby, if we go to the next slide. Several other areas that we look at as part of our risk assessment, we evaluate the city's significant accounting policies and procedures, including any of those that may require significant management judgments and estimates. There are certain numbers in the financial statements where there are assumptions or it may be an estimate, and so we have to get comfortable that the assumptions that the city may be using, that they appear to be appropriate and cause the numbers to be materially accurate. We also look at the control environment, which, as I've kind of discussed previously, and the possibility that the control system may not be operating effectively or to the extent that it could. And one thing that we also look at is what are the internal controls as it relates to the IT environment? Are there automated controls and strengths and strong guards in place to ensure that there are no breakdowns in the IT environment? And then one thing that we also do is throughout the audit, we do a continual assessment of materiality thresholds. Is what that means. At the beginning of the audit, it's kind of quantitative, where we calculate certain thresholds, and we want differences to be less than that to feel comfortable that the financial statements are materially correct. If throughout the audit and during the audit we become aware of additional information or circumstances that cause us to focus more in an area because we became aware of something that might be considered a potential risk, we do continually evaluate and can decrease those materiality thresholds as needed. Going into the next slide, this is my last slide here. We've already gone through and done our initial risk assessments and planning. As part of that initial assessment, and as part of our plan scope of the audit, we've identified some of these bullet points that you can see here as being some of the higher risk areas as it relates to the city of Laramie for the fiscal year 22 audit. There always is a presumption that there is fraud risk for any audit, and so that's not unique to the city of Laramie, and so we design certain procedures related to that. That is also the case as it relates to internal control over financial reporting. So we develop certain procedures to get comfortable of the safeguards that the city has in place there. Another presumption is that revenue recognition is a higher risk area. That is not unique to the city of Laramie. That is any government or entity being out there as auditors under the audit standards, we are required to identify that as a higher risk area. The self-insured health insurance plan, that fund, that is an area that is specific to the city of Laramie, and we've identified that as a higher risk as a result of the prior year finding that we previously discussed. The second point at the bottom, implementation of the new lease standard, GASB 87. At times, if there are implementation of new standards, we do focus in more heavily in those areas just to ensure that the implementation was correct. And then subsequent events, any events that may have occurred after June 30th of 2022 that would have a significant impact on the financial statements for the fiscal year ended 6/30/22, we do certain procedures to determine whether there are any events after that period that would affect the numbers as of that date. And with that being said, Abby, I'm going to transition back to you, but I don't know if there are any questions as it relates to findings, to risk, to our audit strategy.
Council, any questions?
I do have a question. But
Yeah, Councilor Pierce. Would
the
you
end if
prefer
want.
we wait?
It's totally up to you.
Okay, well, let's just go for
That's
it.
great.
In terms of the internal controls, which is going to be new for us, right? Generally speaking, not specific to Laramie, when you do this process, do you see the organization gaining efficiencies? Less paperwork, less time, less, and just gain these efficiencies? Or do you see things becoming more cumbersome, bogged down? And maybe that's an unfair question, I don't know.
As it specifically relates to the city's practices?
Not necessarily the city, but just in general. I mean, because it would be my hope that we could find maybe better efficiencies to save time, energy, potentially dollars.
Absolutely.
And I'm just kind of curious how that shakes out, not specifically for
Sure,
Laramie,
just
but like
in
in
theory.
general
Yeah.
audit world.
That's
right?
perfect. So Mike and I talk a lot. Government auditing is a commodity in a lot of respects, correct? You have to have one. You don't have a choice. The state of Wyoming tells you that you have to. So behind that, then, how do you distinguish yourself, right? This is where, when we test internal controls and we take that approach, I think that's where the greatest value add comes as an auditor, because we do get to look at the processes and say, yep, that all looks fine. Or as we're testing through, if we notice that there's redundant steps, or if there's a step lacking, or any of those things, we can make all sorts of recommendations to management on what best practices we've seen, that are kind of available to us, or, just facilitating that conversation, because really the internal controls are what you do day in and day out. Presenting your financial statements is one time during the year, right, on full accrual GAAP. So for us, Mike and I believe the internal control, yes, that makes the audit more efficient, but we also think that's where the value add comes to our audit clients, because if we see anything, because we've taken that approach, we can make recommendations if we see, reason for improvement, or, praise of, yes, that works really well, so on and so forth. Micah, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think just one quick item I would add, and it's the fact that you can be good and not have internal control issues or deficiencies, which would be a reportable finding, but still have opportunities for best practices or improve efficiency improvements, and we're continually providing that type of feedback, and so.
If you found problems, you would increase your sample size. But also, I guess for the internal controls, you'd probably, for each thing that can happen, you'd have to go through the process. Like, if you purchase this, then
Correct.
all these things happen. Is my
Yep,
understanding
so
that
we
right?
go through and we first obtain an understanding of the internal control process. Processes aren't necessarily a control. The way we do something, X, Y, and Z is a process. Someone who reviews and approves, that's the control. So once we understand that process, we identify what are called key controls, and then we pull our population, and then we get a sample, and then it is, okay, in payroll, we need to see an employee time card that's been signed by the employee, it's been signed by a supervisor. Okay, now we need to make sure it's going into the batch that's being reviewed and approved, and that's being uploaded by someone separate for direct deposit, or whatever those controls might be. So you are correct. It's a checklist of, attributes on what we're moving through. Internal controls, look a little bit different versus if we're testing something for is a balance accurate. But you are correct. It's a population and a sample based on how risky, right, how complex in nature that process might be.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other questions, Council?
Those are great questions.
Mr. Klinger, I have one question if I could. You mentioned
Sure.
our self-insurance pool. Is that inherently more risky to be self-insured, or is that increased scrutiny simply because of the previous finding?
It's the latter. It's due to the previous finding, and so we'll. That's the reason that was kind of elevated, because that's nothing necessarily unique to the city of Laramie. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, so being self-insured does not pose a risk for financial reporting. Under professional standards, we are required to follow up if there was an audit finding in the prior period, so.
Thank you. All right, back to you.
All right, great questions, I love it. I'm afraid of, there we go. All right, so we're in process. What does this overall timeline look like? We've obviously been through the award process. We've all signed our contracts. We're getting ready to roll. We met as a team internally in December. We met with Jennifer Wade and her team in January to kind of talk about what are we going to do? What's the process going to look like? Things look different than prior years. You know, obviously we need to be very respectful of the city's time as you're undergoing, you know, big implementation plans with the ERP system. So really trying to keep an open door of communication to figure out how we're going to put all these pieces together while allowing everyone at the city to still do their job and not be terribly burdened. We've technically started some of our audit field work. We have a lot of planning that has to go through in the front end before we can pick a sample to test. So we're in kind of that phase right now. The city's been provided a very long laundry list of items that we need, so they're uploading those to our portal. As that moves through, we've scheduled some specific times in late February, well, mid-February, late February, and early March, where we plan to have very specific things done. We want to have internal control testing done first, then we're going to do the single audit, so the grant testing, and then we'll come on site for a week, probably down in the courtroom, in the jury room downstairs, and do our actual field work for the financial statement audit. Our goal is so that in March, we can be working on that report preparation, be communicating to you guys if we have any findings or concerns, so that we can issue and conclude this in April. Then the next fiscal year will quickly end for June 2023, and then we will shift back to more of our summer, fall season with issuance early in December going forward. Independence, I said we would be remiss if we did not talk about that. Independence is the pillar of a financial statement audit. I cannot provide an opinion if I am not independent, if I'm not independent in a fact or appearance. So in our engagement letter, we all communicated back and forth that we are independent of each other. We would need to maintain that. That's something we take very seriously as CPAs, so we monitor that. If we ever were in a situation where we were providing services to the city that could be deemed non-audit services, we would need to justify why that does not impede our independence. Currently, we do not provide any of those services to the city of Laramie, so nice, clean, straightforward associated with that. But certainly the engagement letter that you signed talks more extensively about what independence is required of the city and us as auditors. This is the audit service team. You've already met, obviously, Micah and myself. We have Mark Grant, who is a senior, and Star Loving, who is an audit associate. They were both Micah and my former colleagues at a previous firm who we thankfully recruited over, so they have some great previous knowledge. We're also really excited. In the time that we sent this to you guys in your packet to today, we have actually signed an audit manager who will be starting with us on March 1st. So on the week of field work, he will be here getting his feet wet. So we're really excited to continue to grow the organization and grow that depth so that we can really provide high, client service to you guys that's timely with open and honest communication about deadlines and needs and expectations. We're just really looking forward to this opportunity. I'm really excited about, obviously, it's my own firm for the first time, so I get to make those calls, and it's great to work with a community that obviously I live and work and my children go to school in, but also that I get to take what I've worked on in the past and get to provide the customer service that I want to under Klinger Hagerman. At this time, I would open the floor if there are any other questions that you guys have or comments.
Thank you. Councilor Shumway.
Mikey, just a quick question. Are you related to Cole Klingler?
Cole is my younger brother.
You have a great family.
Councilor O'Doherty.
I just have a comment. I'm really grateful that you started your own firm and saw this need and applied to the RFP. It's so important. I know when I worked at the university, I'd freak out when we had an audit because I was raised Catholic and I'm always feeling guilty, but here, I think that Jennifer Wade is like, look at our books. We're very proud of our team, and so I'm really grateful to have an independent local firm, looking at it and seeing if there's any errors. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other questions? I can't see if there's any on Zoom from the two members on there, but I don't see hands. Yeah, Councilor Newman.
So with us kind of behind with 2022, what's that do for our timeline for 2023? Will we, be behind per se?
No, so our goal is to revert back to the normal schedule that it should be, so that the city, since you do elect to be a part of the GFOA's financial reporting excellence with your ACFR, Jen and our goal is always hopefully the very first week or two of December, we are buttoned up and done so we can all enjoy Christmas. So that is our goal. Statutorily, we got to be done by 12/31. Nobody wants to work that late into December, so we're hoping that we will convert back as soon as we issue. A couple months later, we'll start replanning so we can have early issuance in December.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, we will go to, and sorry, Ms. Hagerman, Mr. Klinger, thank you.
Thank you guys so
Looking
much.
forward to working with you.
Thank you.
With that, we will go to public comment. Any public comment on this work session? Okay. Seeing none, we will close that work session and open the next one. This work session is on Cherrywood Loop parking. Which staff member do I have for this one? Mr. Winkler, come on up.
Yes, good evening, Mayor, Honorable Council. Today's work session, we're going over Cherrywood Loop parking. I'll give a quick brief description, like background of what's going on out there, and then we do have representatives here for the applicant and online as well. So, staff received an application for modification to parking in May of 2022, and that application was requesting that the parking be removed, as well as the establishment of 25-mile-an-hour zone speed limit in the area. The application came with support documentation. We provided that in our council packet. The people, or the applicant, was also accompanied with the letter from the representatives for the applicant that completed the design for the Timberline subdivision. So the engineering firm that is there, Coffee Engineering, they did the design for the original Timberline subdivision. When we went out and reviewed everything, we did find that the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit zone was already established. It's in place and was already adequate. But based on the other findings that we had out there, we looked at the Timberline subdivision. It's zoned general commercial, C2, and so with that, we need to be able to accommodate both passenger vehicles, but also the larger vehicles for deliveries for other operations in the area. The Cherrywood Loop cross-section, during design, we did reduce that cross-section. Typical cross-section for a local street in Laramie is 46 foot. We have a 42-foot roadway out there. So it was reduced, and with that, we did have conversations during the review process of the subdivision to have parking removed during construction. That, unfortunately, we did not get that into the construction drawings. We also did not get it followed up on during the inspection during construction. So that's kind of how we got to where we are with that portion of it. Looking at the 42-foot roadway, if you look at it, typical, your typical parking lane is about 10 foot, right in there, and with the larger vehicles out in that area. And that would reduce our travel lanes to less than 12 foot. 12 foot's kind of the standard throughout Laramie. You'd be looking at closer to a 10.5-foot lane, which when you start getting large vehicles passing each other, that's what staff would agreed with the applicant, that there's concerns with that. This area currently has On the Hook, Black Hills Energy, 307 Meats, I-80 Towing, and the Forest Service. They all use larger vehicles at times. So we do expect to have large vehicle traffic in the area. So staff, after we did our review, we then advertised public notice for the Traffic Safety Commission meeting that was held on August 11th. The property owners within 700 foot of Cherrywood Loop were notified, and we did receive one public comment. It was from Mr. Andrews, who owns the On the Hook property, and there was concerns noted that were also provided in your packet of the parking being needed for his operations and other benefits that were outlined for the community that he provided in that letter. No other comments were received. Nobody else reached out regarding this. And then we took our recommendation to remove parking. Staff did agree with the applicant to have the parking removed in the area. That was presented at Traffic Commission. And then the parking was delayed due to not having the adequate paint supply last summer. Otherwise, it may have been already installed at that time. So I guess that's a brief background. I think we got like I said, the applicant's representatives here. So I'd open it up for questions for staff or the applicant.
Members, any questions? Thank you, Mr. Winkler. Should we, I suspect. Oh, Councilor Somerville. Sorry, I didn't see you right away.
Mayor, that's okay. I can wait if we want to hear from the applicant and the other folks first, however you want to do it.
Councilor, that was my thought. I think there will be some comments on this from members of the public and concerned parties. So without objection, Council, let's go to that. Is there any members of the public that would wish to speak on this? Mr. Coffey, please give us your name for the record.
Sure. Honorable Mayor, Council, my name is Dave Coffey, Coffey Engineering and Surveying. Is that loud enough? Why do you need to do that?
Yeah, that's all right.
Story of my life.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking this under consideration tonight. I agree with everything Mr. Winkler said. We did discuss this issue with staff, and it was one of the issues that we brought up that allowed the engineering department to agree to reduce the width of the street, was to eliminate on-street parking. For whatever reason, between what the developer, our team, and the city allowed happened, it never made those comments never made it to the final subdivision agreement. This came to light when we have had communications with the developer and his sales agents where there's excessive parking on the street that we recognize as a safety problem, and is a consideration that several potential buyers for those lots have raised a concern about. So that is why we brought this concern back to the city, because it really was the intent of the developer to have no parking on the streets, and it was the intent of the engineering department with the city to not allow it to happen. So we'd like to see that this issue corrected for basically for public health and safety reasons. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. My colleague Flint Polson, who was the project manager and design engineer on the project, is here for any further questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Coffey.
Yep.
Thanks for taking time to join us. And I see Mr. Van Fleet has requested public comment, has his hand up now. Mr. Van Fleet, when you're in the room, the floor is yours. Does City Clerk, my microphone was off, so I'm just going to let him know. Mr. Van Fleet, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and Council. My name is Jeff Van Fleet. I'm an attorney with Brown & Heiser. We represent Timberline Business Park. As Mr. Coffey stated, it appears in looking at the historical documents here that both the comments made by the city and the parties related to planning and zoning this intended for this area to be a no parking zone. The road is platted as a 60-foot wide roadway, which was based on the recommendations of the city and staff, and those same recommendations stated that there would be no parking. In the time since my client has had this park, we've already experienced significant issues with parking. My client designed this park so that everybody could park on their own lot, and that was part of the initial process. But since then, some parties have parked numerous vehicles on the street. And we've also seen the presence of people living in RVs and things like that in the park, really just becoming kind of a blight on the city. Additionally, we have at least 2 different potential buyers for lots, one of which is looking at bringing probably $10 to $15 million worth of annual revenue. The second being a local business which already has several locations and would like to add another one. So it's really created a problem for us because these purchases will not go through unless we can satisfy the need for them to be able to allow their customers to come in. The entity that is looking at bringing in like $10 to $15 million of sales will need the ability to bring in large vehicles to deliver equipment. We'll be doing equipment sales of a national recognized name. So we would ask the city to join with us in correcting the error that was made in the process, the oversight, and not making the roads no parking. Thank you, Honorable Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Van Fleet. Is there any other public comment on this item? I can't see that name. Oh, yes, Mr. Ocean Andrews, the floor is yours when you are in the Zoom room. Thanks.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
All right. Doesn't seem to be a video button. I'm not sure whether you can see me or not, but thank you, Mayor Harrington and members of the council. I appreciate
Mr. Andrews, I believe you may have gone on. Oh, we've lost you now entirely. Oh, there you are. Okay. Yes.
Am I back? All right. I apologize for that. Sorry, having some technical difficulties. But again, thank you for taking time to hear my testimony on this. I'm Ocean Andrew. I own On the Hook Fish and Chips, and we have been on Cherrywood West Loop for 2 years now. Originally, when we bought the lot, when we bought a corner lot, one of the important considerations of that was that obviously we don't run that parking. We have access to a lot of parking directly in front of our lot because businesses expand and contract. And at certain times we have needed more parking than at other times. We have, in the past, we have parked quite a few medium-sized vehicles out there, I would say. And we have since tried to clean that up by putting a storage lot on the back of our parking lot, so that now we're still needing street parking, but we are, with random exceptions here and there for short-term stuff, we are mostly just parking employee vehicles out there, and it's not taking up too much room. Additionally, we are one of the companies on this loop that needs access for very large vehicles, full-sized semi-trucks. on multiple times a week to get our product in and out. And with that, we've experienced no issues with there being parking on the loop. And additionally, I've talked to I-80 Towing, who they themselves have large vehicles, and he expressed no concern with access to his lot with us parking cars on the road. I would, at minimum, ask the council to consider, if we do need to do something about this, to consider at least some compromises, such as back-in parking on one side of the road, or banning large commercial vehicles with the allowance of loading zones for, when a truck comes in, this happens to us a lot, like a truck will come in and they'll get there at 2 a.m, so they need to wait until we get there to unload the truck. But if they wait on our lot, they will be blocking our vehicles from getting out of the building until we can finish the unloading. So we might need them to wait on the street till we can move the vehicle out and then pull that vehicle in and unload. So I think there's definitely some compromises that can be made, but I would just strongly ask not to take the parking entirely, because I think us and many future businesses will need this for lots of purposes. So, thank you.
Thank you for taking the time. Mr. Andrews, any other public comment? Sure, come forward. And give us your name for the record.
Paul Montoya, 1974 Truman Street. Mr. Mayor, city councilors, I have visited a number of businesses out in this loop before in the past, and I specifically took a drive last week out through the loop to see the issue. And one thing I would recommend, I think Mr. Andrews is also kind of recommending, it seems like it's a wide enough street at the width that it is to allow parking, but as a compromise, I'm wondering if you would consider allowing parking just on one side of the street and not the other. That seems like that would solve any issues with any businesses that need some on-street parking, even future businesses that might, and still allow for the truck traffic that's needed. So that would be my comment.
Thank you, Mr. Montoya. Sure, come forward, sir. Welcome. Give us your name for the record.
Mayor and Council, Kelsey Christensen. I own 307 Meat Company, and I'm located in the Timberline Business Park. I'm probably one of the biggest employers out there currently, and I use a lot of the on-street parking for my employees, or they use that on-street parking. I do agree that it can get tight out there, especially on those curves. This was not exposed to me as a buyer previously to this, that the street parking was not supposed to be out there. I could go on for hours about missed problems with this development, water and sewer issues. But as far as on-street parking, I would ask that the council come to a compromise and we allow on-street parking on one side. My suggestion would be on the outer side of the loop, especially as it goes on the east side of the property, the Timberline Business Park against the Knife River development between my property and to the south. There's a big stretch there, but there's no business that has access. It's just a fence line and a fire hydrant. And so I would ask that the council consider a consideration to limit the street parking to one side rather than eliminating on both sides of the street.
Thank you for taking time to join us this evening. Any other members of the public wish to speak on this issue? Okay, with that, council, we're going to come back for questions, comments, your choice. Mr. Newman.
I don't know who to address. I have two questions. One of them kind of goes along with the gentleman from 307 Meat Market, so maybe the developer. He's here, correct? Was any other lots sold without notifying the purchaser that there was supposed to be no parking on the street?
Do we have somebody that can take that question? I'm not sure if we have the agent or the actual developer, just their engineer.
Okay.
Okay.
Second part would be for staff then. Could we make this a one-way and have parking on one side to kind of help with traffic with the larger semis, and I know food trucks and cattle trucks that probably go to 307 Meat Market. Is that something that we could entertain?
Honorable Mayor, through you, we haven't evaluated having parking on one side of the street, as the design with the curve designs and all that account for certain roadway widths to make those a safe turning radius on that. So the roadway being designed to have that extra space is why we've kind of limited our evaluation to removing parking on both sides. That would take further investigation, I guess, on that. And I don't know that it meets the intent of the request, the application request. That's why it was not evaluated at that point. And could you repeat your second part of your question? Or
Is it something that we could make it a one-way instead?
it is, it's a long stretch to make it a one-way. Typically, you would have something there. We haven't evaluated it as a one-way, and then what you run into both with kind of trying to establish parking on one side versus the other side is, like you said, with one applicant or with one person in the area, they would want it on the outer side of the loop. You could assume that if you own property on the inner side of the loop, you might want it on that side. Same thing as which direction do you put the one-way? Which way is it more beneficial? Do you kind of hinder one property and then help another? So there's a lot of dynamic to that. It could be evaluated and it could be reviewed. So.
Thank you. Any other questions, Council? Councilor Somerville?
Thank you, Mayor. My question is a follow-up for Mr. Winkler, if he hasn't sat down yet.
He's on his way back, Councilor.
Thanks. So my question would be just similar follow-up. I guess the first part is, if we asked for an evaluation on just removing the parking on one side, so that would leave a 32-foot roadway, and then maybe doing an evaluation on the one-way, how long and what would that entail for you guys to take a look at that?
Honorable Mayor, through you, exact timeline on that, I don't know exactly. We could do some of the evaluation again with the design being completed by Coffey Engineering. The intimate knowledge for the project is more housed in their facility, their office. Their engineers have done more evaluation there. We could do a quick turn analysis in our office, but I think the evaluation would probably be better suited to reach out and try and go with the people who designed it originally.
Thank you. Mayor, can I ask a follow-up question of Mr. Coffey?
Please.
Mr. Coffey, kind of hearing the testimony, is it an option to look at, from your standpoint, a compromise, or look at what would be left if we only left parking on one side of the street, or trying to find a compromise on this?
That would certainly be something I'd have to ask my client. I cannot speak for him.
That's fair. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Richardson.
I was just going to say, if we are going to go down this road of doing an evaluation and seeking a compromise, someone had mentioned that the curb is an issue along that way, and making sure that, I shouldn't say making sure, just keeping the idea open that maybe it's not even a full side of the street that's parking. If that curve creates an issue, could we block off that curve for no parking and still continue to have parking on the other side as we continue? So just being open to different options, I think, creatively to help maybe think about a compromise.
Thank you, Councilor. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a comment about an experience I had last week, and I was going in to go to 307 meets, and as I passed on the hook, there were cars parked on both sides. There were probably 6 on the right side and maybe 4 or 5 on the left side. And because of this issue, I had slowed down and was kind of looking and assessing it. And at the same time, a car was coming, a SUV was coming from the other direction, probably about 20, 25 miles an hour. And really, with both cars, it's like a one-way. You'd have to be going mighty slow to get two cars to pass that. And so what happened is that we both had to quickly brake on ice to avoid running into each other. It was right at that curve, and it really was pretty frightening to me. So I think that parking on both sides of the street is absolutely unacceptable. It's not safe, especially at those corners. I think we need to have a good sight line when you're taking those corners. But I would like to see some investigation into if some parking areas could be established on one side so that it can accommodate employees and different people with the business. So that was my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilor O'Doherty.
It's unfortunate that we're in between all these businesses that are important to our community. I want to side on the side of safety because I'm risk averse, but the other thing is we have to consider if it's one side, parking on one side, then our city, we have an ordinance that says you can only park in front on somebody's, front of their property if you have the permission of the owner. So it means that only half of the owners, or it's probably more than half, but anyway, only some of the owners would have street parking and others would not. So that creates a problem too. I think this is very unfortunate, and I'm wondering if there's some way we can ease some of the restrictions on parking on the grass in order to ameliorate this situation. Just throwing it out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Shumway.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think we all know that there's deliveries made downtown where there is no opportunity for semis and things to park, and they just park in the middle of the street and make deliveries, and that seems to be approved. At least it's not, I don't see citations. I would think that if we designate an area for parking, let's say it's on one side, I don't think it would take long before there'd be several people that decide that that's their place for long-term parking, for RVs, campers and such, and take up all the space that's necessary for business. I would much prefer to have something where the parking is for deliveries and pickup, and signage indicating that there is no long-term parking, only for deliveries, pickup, and we have to make some allowance for employees. I know that. I don't know how to solve this problem. I'm sure that the engineers and those people that are doing this can come up with a better solution than what we can come up as a council. We can talk about it and give ideas, but I want to make sure that this is something that works for the businesses, it works for the people that live there, and also it's not abused by the people that take advantage of such opportunities.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other comments from the council? Councilor Newman.
Going forward, is this something that we could look at, that we don't allow such a narrow road so we don't have this problem in the future? So something else just to kind of think about too, that I jotted down as everybody else was talking. So
thank you, Councilor. I think that's a great idea. Any other members? Councilor Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to kind of add on, I don't think I need an answer, but along the lines of some of the comments I've heard, signage, kind of along the way that Councilor Shumway described, maybe the signage is no commercial vehicle parking, and maybe we designate a loading zone that's available between, midnight and 7 a.m. or something along those lines. I'm just wondering if we can kind of add that into the mix, that a combination of maybe some parking on one side of the street in certain areas and some signage might not offer the best opportunity to balance both interests.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other members? Counselor Richardson.
Just one comment to the parking of campers and that sort of thing. From my understanding, there's an ordinance in place that those are not allowed to be parking if they're not in front of someone's house. And so maybe it's also enforcing the ordinance that's already there to address some of that long-term parking of people just parking and leaving their vehicles there.
Thank you. Sure, Counselor Pierce.
Yeah, I really like Counselor Newman's comment because frankly, we as a council and community allow the developer to save a little bit on the size of his road, right? Because they're responsible for constructing the road. So they were allowed to save some money because it's not as wide as other roads or C2 type roads. And then he was also able to, or she, whomever, was able to recoup other funds because that allowed more property to be for sale, right? Because they're, right? So when we have these C2 zoned areas, maybe we just need not to be so nice, right? And actually have a road that could allow parking on both sides and still get emergency vehicles to go around and be safe, or semis or big old, tow trucks with semis attached to them or delivery trucks or whatever to make that curve or come up with a different design. I mean, I think it's all great to think about compromise now, after the fact, which is good, and our great engineering department's going to have to come up with all sorts of potential scenarios, and like they have time. But anyway, why did we allow this in the first place, I guess is my question. And frankly, I think down the road in the future, when, as we know, this community is going to grow and has been growing, we just need to say no to these type of things, because here we are, kind of stuck, now having to come up with a solution, or brought to us and spend our time to come up with a solution when it just creates a lot of hassle, in the meantime. I mean, I don't know. It just seems like we've gone above and beyond to accommodate, and we maybe shouldn't have in the first place.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other? Counselor Newman.
Another concern I wrote down, if we just have specific loading and unloading zones for these semis or whatnot, now we have to take in consideration that we're going to be putting more forklifts throughout the whole road as well. And now we have, a forklift maybe going from one side of maybe in front of 307 to in front of On the Hook, let's say. And now we have a forklift contending with on-street traffic, on-street parking. So that's something else to kind of look at that kind of popped in my head as well, like where these unloading zones will be, and will it be safe for the operators of these, the equipment that's going to unload them. So that's kind of something to look at as well.
Okay, thank you, Counselor. Any other comments? I would add, I'm struggling with this one. We framed it a handful of times as taking parking from one side of the street. I would just remind the council that any action we take would be adding parking to this development. The decision has been made that zero street parking is the baseline. So I would just remind the council that that is where we are starting. I'd remind the public that that's where we're starting. Councilor Doherty, you mentioned the value of each of these businesses to the community, and I couldn't agree more. I am struggling with why we are in the middle of this when the decision has been made, and the development, to two of my colleagues' point, that we shouldn't allow streets to be smaller. But if we do allow streets to be smaller, then we should follow through with our decision, because this whole development hinges on that decision, right? So if we can get away with a compromise, parking on one side of the street and the parties can agree, okay. I don't want to remove this as an opportunity for the city in the future, but if we do, we can't have this conversation again, right? We can't make a decision and then sort of like wind it back later. Because we do just end up creating an unsafe situation. And I think that there are drop-offs and deliveries in tighter places that are less ideal, but I don't think the businesses in this location, I guess I should say, I think the businesses in this location selected where their business is located because it avoids those problems. And each business has a significant amount of space on their property to provide parking. Some of them have built to a spot, and we're not involved in the negotiations with their real estate companies and those deals, right? That's not our business to know whether they were informed or not, as unfortunate as that would be. So, Council, I just wanted to maybe reset the baseline, and then I guess those are my feelings on it, and then I'll go back to you, Councilor Newman.
So I kind of struggle with this as well, like which way to look at this. However, the whole purpose of this conversation is because it was approved, right, for not parking on the street, but it got approved in the designs that there was parking on the street. No, is it?
The design indicated no parking on the street. The error was in implementing the design.
Okay.
It was missed at that point.
Okay.
Sure.
Honorable Mayor, just a point of clarification on that would be that the design, when we made that adjustment to the design, the conversations were to have that done. The omission is through reviews and through submissions, that note never made it to the plan set to be implemented in the field. So there's definitely communication that happened about it that didn't get followed through with getting it to where it would be implemented.
So, Mr. Winkler, I'm incorrect then in saying that the baseline is zero parking. Now the baseline is actually that there's full parking on both sides of the street?
So, the baseline, I guess it depends on when you look at the baseline of it. So, the baseline would be that through the design and through the way the road was actually designed to be safe, there would be no parking on the roadway. That note never made it to the plan set to be implemented. So that's the clarification.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Councilor Pierce?
So can I put it in my head in maybe simpler terms, right? Because right? So to me, at least how I understood things, initially the design was for no parking. And then somewhere between the initial design stage, final plat, whatever, this little bit of the whole process created a hiccup, right? Either it was missed when everything was submitted, or somehow it was just missed, right? Either it didn't end up on the final plat or whatever, but all of this was talked about and it was just a hiccup. It was just something it was a mistake, right? That it didn't end up on the very final design, yet it was understood by both sides, the developer as well as the city, that it was going to be no parking, right? And somehow in there was a hiccup. Was that close?
Yeah. Honorable Mayor, through you, yes. So the process on this one did take a little bit of a different than our normal steps for the process of this subdivision, with construction kind of coming before some of the platting process and different things. And that is where I believe some of the communication came through and then did not make it to the plan set, but yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Thank you, Mr. Winkler. And actually, if you'll give me just 1 second, I was going to go to Mr. Van Fleet before we come back to you. He's been waiting a while.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few points of clarification. One, the developer, my client, requested an 80-foot road. And if you look at the 2016 notes from Derek Tinney, the city, it was the city that reduced the road size. It wasn't our client. So it wasn't one of those situations where the city was trying to save money or the developer was trying to save money. The developer actually asked for 80 feet. And if you look at the letter that's been supplied to council, you'll see I quoted Derek Penny's comments were, we asked for 80 feet. The city reduced it to reduce their maintenance costs. And then as the process went forward between the city and the plat and the developer, there was an oversight. But this is an oversight that all parties own. And I've spoke to my client while you were discussing this, and he's absolutely willing to consider no parking on one side. His concern would be that the parking be permitted on the inside circle. If you've ever driven a truck, you know that you need those wide turns. And so if we can give the trucks as much room as possible by having no parking on the outside, that would make more sense. And maybe we look at where the trucks are parked and just have vehicle parking on the inside circle. So there's definitely things my client is willing to do to help address this issue, but I just want to be clear that it wasn't a cost savings step. It was a request of the city. We made the adjustment, and now we would like to correct it because it's become a safety issue. As the Vice Mayor said, it's not safe to travel there with cars on both sides of the road. And we're absolutely willing to work with the city in addressing the problem that was an oversight.
Thank you, Mr. Van Fleet, and Council, thank you for letting me go a little out of order there. Mr. Van Fleet had waited for some time, so Mr. Newman, do you still have a question?
I do. So I guess my question, because I can't find in our packet the final plat. Does the final plat say 0 parking, or does it allow parking? That was kind of my question, and I don't, like, I understand the communication barrier and the you know, but on the final plat, does it show parking, does it not show parking? Or does it allow parking or not allow parking?
Mr. Winkler?
Honorable Mayor, through you, typically those notes are within the construction plans. And in the construction plans, that note was not included. So that's where it's at. So currently, the no parking requirement of it was not included with the final construction plans.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Winkler. Any other questions, Council? Because it's been casual in format, members of the public, any other comments? Council, back to you for any closing thoughts on this work session. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate Mr. Van Fleet's remarks and conveying to us the willingness of the developer, who I believe brought this forward, to consider parking on one side of the street. So we may have a solution.
Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Thank you.
Councilor Newman?
Back to the city ordinance, though, how do we make sure that it is okay that they can park on one side of the street and have the approval of those business owners? I kind of feel like this is a lose-lose for everybody. So that's kind of one of my concerns too. If we do allow parking on one side of the street, how do we make it fair and make sure that they really do have approval from those business owners? So.
Thank you, Councilor. I suppose we could designate it as public parking with potentially no overnight parking or some restriction like that to keep it from being permanent. Councilor Somerville?
Mayor, I just wanted to express some appreciation from both sides of this conversation and the city staff. And hopefully, I think my request from this work session would be to ask everybody of those parties to go back, have some conversations, and figure out what might work for a compromise so we can get that done as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor O'Doherty?
I was wondering, when is painting season? Thank you.
Great question, Councilor. Public Works Director.
If you can tell me when it's going to warm up, I can tell you when it's going to paint. Now, honestly, the street says usually end of May, 1st of June. They've got to have certain temperatures overnight, for 24 to 48 hours. So usually end of May, 1st of June.
Thank you, Director Webb.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. And City Manager, we require 90 days notice for any modification to the existing parking, regardless of what so we wouldn't hear this for 90 days even if we had a plan tonight to move on?
Mayor and Council, that's correct. I believe what we will do is ask for a modification, for the applicant to modify their request to modify parking to reflect the one-side option, and then 90-day notice would go out, and then we'll make the evaluation. Anything else throw in there? We'll just run it back to traffic. Yeah, and then we'll run, and then the normal process will take over, which is when folks apply for a modification to on-street parking, it goes to Traffic Commission, they approve it, done. As you well know, these things don't typically come to you. This is why you have a Traffic Commission.
Right.
This was just unusual enough that here we are.
Councilor Richardson.
I'm just wondering if those business owners in the area have a relationship enough to maybe start talking about some of these things to help with the safety, so that maybe people can come to a compromise and try to start addressing this before the city, while the city is also working on it. So, you know, if each of the business owners can say, hey, let's think about all moving to one side so that we have a safer entryway. I mean, it's you guys as business owners, but just a thought.
Thank you, Councilor. Good idea. Councilor Shumway.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm getting a sense that there is a greater need for business and commercial parking than there is for public parking. So I would be, at this point, reluctant to approve public parking if we decide that it's going to work, a compromise to do one side.
Thank you, Councilor. Seems like a wise idea. Any other members? Councilor Gabriel, sorry, I didn't see you.
Thanks, Mayor. I was just curious, since I didn't hear an answer from Mr. Winkler about Mr. Van Fleet's comment, originally 80 and then the city or someone paring it down because the city wanted to save money. Could I get an explanation about the background on that? Because it seems to me, you know, we've had a great discussion about compromise and all that, but I was just wondering about originally the way it was constructed, and now, you know, it was pared down, and what Mr. Van Fleet had said, is that what the city understands?
Honorable Mayor, through you, that is not the way I understood the process, but I would have to kind of defer to the planning office as if they wrote the staff report that stated it. So
understood. Thank you. I just like to see that, you know, everybody's talked about a compromise since we're in this position presently, and it seems to me reasonable that we can get this worked out and we can come up with some solution anyway that is going to satisfy, I think, most of the people in that area, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. And City Manager, did you have a comment there?
Yes, thank you. Mayor, through you, Councilor Gabriel, I believe that our development codes do allow for this width of right-of-way, this 40-foot right-of-way in this particular zone. And so for that reason, I suspect that's why Mr. Taney, our planning manager, would have made note to the developer on the plans that they submitted that, yes, you could build an 80-foot wide road, but the minimum required by code is 40 foot, perhaps, in this circumstance. It's not necessarily untrue for Mr. Van Fleet to say that the city's maintenance costs are going to be lower on a less wide, less significantly sized right-of-way. But I think it is, how would I say, the reason that in certain commercial zones like this, you would allow for a smaller right-of-way with no parking on the side is based on the use there and making sure that you get the adequately sized transportation amenity in there to serve that kind or type of development. And I think it is true that no one really expected public parking on the roadway, right? These businesses are not really heavy, intense, walk-up retail kinds of businesses. And they do have off-street parking. So it's not untrue that it lowers the city's maintenance cost, but it also is not untrue that it is a benefit to the developer to have more property go into beneficial use that they can then resale as an improved lot. So I think both things are true simultaneously. But what I want to assure you is the staff aren't going out like telling people build really narrow, not safe streets. No, all of that is dictated in code, and then they are simply enforcing the codes that have been approved and implemented by the city council. Does that help?
Thank you, City
Very
Manager.
good, thank you.
Council. Put your hand up, Councilor. Great. All right. Well, I'm not sure if that's clear or not for my sense of it, staff. I do think the council seems amenable to finding a compromise here. I would be particularly wary, this is just my own opinion, particularly wary of large vehicles being parked on the street, and any sort of permanent parking on the street feels potentially more hazardous than vehicles of employees. I can certainly understand the need for that. So if that is clear enough direction, and council seems to agree, then we will we'll go to the public one more time, I guess, just for the sake of giving a chance to speak. Mr. Van Fleet, I saw your camera came on. Go ahead. Floor is yours.
I just want to say I agree with your comments. I think that we can come to a compromise here that will meet the needs of all the parties and, more importantly, create a more safe park. We're committed to doing that.
Thank you, Mr. Van Fleet. And do I see Mr. Andrew? Is that whose hand is up? Go ahead and let him into the room, City Clerk. Mr. Andrew, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Mayor and members of the City Council. I appreciate where this conversation is going, and I would say that as a business on the inside of the loop, I would also agree that the outside of the loop is the best place for parking, just because there is obviously more length there. Yeah, I appreciate everyone's willingness to work together, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew. Any other members of the public? Okay. Seeing none, we're going to go ahead and close that work session. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your evening to join the City Council. Members, we are into council comments and any council updates. Does anyone have anything that falls under that realm? I know we're early into our boards and commissions, but this would be your chance to update us on those.
I'm just looking forward to the retreat. We've got the retreat
Absolutely. Retreat this weekend.
Anxious to find out my color.
I'm going to go to Councilor Richardson first. Me too.
I sat in the Laramie Public Art Coalition meeting this week, as did Mayor Harrington, and they have just recently installed, I haven't been able to see it in person, but I've seen pictures, wonderful installation at the county building, so I encourage everyone to go over and check that out. And they seem to be really moving in some exciting directions otherwise.
Thank you. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. It's been it's only Tuesday and it's been a busy week. I had a meeting with the Albany County Mental Health Board. It was probably about 15 people and a good representation from around the city. We now have a data sharing agreement with Dr. White from UW, with LPD, and also with the Sheriff's Office. So she will be able to look through data and give us various reports and answer various queries that we might have. We're working with the hospital, the sheriff's office, detention, and other resources and facilities in the area to try and have better cohesion when it comes to working with people in crisis or who have mental health issues. And I think having all of us at the table is really extremely helpful to breaking down some of the barriers that have existed and into creating things that work better for law enforcement, for the city, and for the citizens of the city who might be in crisis. That committee or group board has now formed subcommittees that will then bring some of the actions forward. And I have been assigned to the subcommittee on developing a crisis response team, and we also met on Monday. And this group has Sheriff Applehans, the chief and assistant chief of LPD, Ivinson, Nico Kleppinger, Aaron Rumsey, VOA, Christian Cavello, Jeff Van Fleet, and Tracy O'Neill. So it's a good group, and we're really starting to move forward in developing actions and less talking and analysis about what we're doing. So I'm really excited about that. A grant was submitted and accepted by the state of Wyoming and is awaiting the governor's signature that would provide money for the initial work necessary to establish a crisis response team. And part of that will include the expansion of CIT training for as many officers as we can. And the ultimate goal is that all officers would be able to receive CIT training. And so that's very exciting move. And then this subgroup will work toward a co-responder crisis response model, where we have a crisis response team who can go out on certain calls with officers and to work together. So it's a long process, but we are really starting to have some movement on this. So,
Councilor?
Yeah, thanks for that. Janine, we've had conversations related to our fire department doing some response, and I know we were in the preliminary stages and potentially a grant for that. And I'm wondering if this particular group needs to be looped in on some of that, or if they already are aware, or because I think you and your team have been very busy working on solutions as well. So I'm just wondering if there might not be some overlap in that area.
Mayor, through you, Councilor Pierce, so certainly I have shared with some of you over the last year a concept that I have that could involve our EMS operation, but I have to tell you, our EMS operation is absolutely overwhelmed right now. We need to really spend some time finding out what their workload is going to look like in the future with respect to 911 response and interfacility transfers between Ivinson and other hospitals. And we're actively discussing that with the hospital right now. Until we conclude that conversation, I feel like we can't go down that road. But I do see opportunity there, and I have shared that with Chief Brown as a new person in the community and our new Chief of Police. I hope that to have that in the back of his head. And of course, the reason that I conceived of that originally, and I've talked with Chief Johnson in Fire Department about it, is that, the council's been pushing for some sort of response model that been pushing me, the city manager, not the manager of the entire community and the world, right? But you all have been pushing us to have kind of a co-responder model. Well, we do not employ health professionals, physical health practitioners, nor mental health practitioners. The only way that we do that is through our emergency medical service, ambulance service. And so for the rest of you, I'll let you know, because Jane was on our intergovernmental steering committee where this was discussed. What we had talked about was the potential for the development of, there's a specialty designation under paramedicine where community paramedics can have a special training and designation in mental health. And so what we had thought of is, well, maybe in the long term, we could have a specialty unit in the fire department that co-responds for mental health crisis with the police department. But we're a ways out from that. We really have to get through this conversation about inter-facility transfers, moving patients from Ivinson to elsewhere. And then that'll help us understand the body of work that is in front of our fire department, because right now the body of work is bigger than they can accomplish. So we need to know what it looks like in the future to know if there's even capacity to do something like that.
Thanks,
So, does that kind of update everyone just really quickly? Okay.
Thank you.
It does, and City Manager, you and I have also had that conversation, and we are also preparing to meet together along with Councilor Somerville with Chief Brown. And I think that the ongoing development that is happening is in the earliest stages, and that developing a response team does not necessarily exclude utilization of EMS as well. So it could be a collaborative, it's completely open right now.
Mayor, could I add one more thing?
Sure, you may.
The reason I looked at EMS, and I think I glossed over this, was because it's something within the sphere of control of the city, right? Because we don't have mental health professionals elsewhere. So I understand council has an urgency about this, and I, rightly so, don't want to delay that. I would suspect if we were going to look at something, building up that kind of capacity in our fire department, it would be a 2 or 3 year out kind of thing. And what I've understood is that's too far out for all of you. But it's something we can all keep in our back pocket and think about. And there may be, in fact, grant funding for this. We're seeing a lot of Fed money come down for mental health and for programs that look at paramedicine as a specialty. And that conversation started happening with the Affordable Care Act now 10 some years ago, because strong paramedicine programs in communities help prevent return visits to ERs and things like that. So there's a lot of moving parts there, but that is something that's definitely further out. So I guess I would say I wouldn't discourage the committee from continuing to move forward. It could be there are mental health professionals out there that don't work for the city and already have that skill, and they could maybe deploy a lot faster than we could internally from our organization. So.
Thank you, City Manager. Yeah, Councilor Richardson.
Just a quick question. You said that was grant funding. Do you know how much it was and how many years, the term of it? If you don't have it handy, no problem. You just share it later.
I seem to remember $750,000.
Okay, for 1 year or multi-year?
I'll get back with you on that.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a good question. I should have written it down.
And Councilor Gabriel and Somerville, do you have questions on this or comments on this? All right. Councilor Gabriel, you had your hand up first. Okay, Councilor Somerville. Thank you, Councilor Gabriel.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to relay to the council, although I certainly have been spurring the sense of urgency, and I would ask the council to wait probably another 60 days before we dive back into this really well. There's a lot of things happening at the state level right now around mobile crisis. The ambulance, the EMS paramedic responder, I think will get submitted as an interim topic to the legislature because there's some statutory changes that need to be made there. So there's a lot of things moving on the ground. So I think I would just echo the Vice Mayor's comments of stuff is going and just a little bit of patience. And I think we'll have some better discussion points in a couple of months.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Gabriel?
Yes, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Albany County tourism board that I attended last week as the liaison, and nothing specific really from the board itself. Things are moving along. I'm really impressed with the staff, the board as well, well-attended meetings, and they're really doing a great job, I think, in Albany County. And I'm proud to be a part of that board, and just wanted to pass along that they are really trying to promote Albany County, and they have a lot of different plans in the mix, and they've really done quite a lot recently with their website, and feel very good about the staff on the tourism board. Thanks.
Thank you, Counselor. I agree with you. Any other members with comments or updates? City Manager?
Mayor, I don't typically give you updates, but I did want to remind you of a couple of things since, we've got this transition happening with new council members and whatnot. Councilor Pierce mentioned the retreat this weekend. We're ready to go with that. Nancy's got some good food lined up, and we have a good full agenda. A reminder, your homework, if you haven't done it yet, is due by tomorrow, end of business. So that's the colors survey, and I got a report from Dan a couple days ago. I think almost everyone had done it. So if you're having any trouble with it, maybe call me or email Dan Clark. He can get you fixed up. And then WHAM is this week, and then I also wanted to let you know that I mentioned it in an email to you all, but with the transition of newly elected officials here at the city and at the county, we do need to pull together our intergovernmental steering committees that you are seated on. So please watch for some scheduling announcements. We'd like to pull you guys together and keep up the momentum on the Joint Growth Area Plan, on the Aquifer Protection Plan, and then our third steering committee we kind of call the catch-all committee because they assess projects that are timely that they want to work on, so that committee needs to kind of get together and decide what they want to do for the year, or whether they just want to work with the other two committees. So,
thank you, City Manager.
Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, Councilor O'Doherty.
So the WHAM conference starts tomorrow, and I'm going, I believe.
I'm going.
Councilor Shumway, is anyone else going? You're going to?
Thursday.
Okay. So I was wondering, I can't remember if there's resolutions. I was trying to find it. And if so, how do we vote on those? Did we didn't establish who's responsible for that?
Okay.
So
maybe it just happens once a
So
year?
if we're to, are there
Is that correct?
resolutions?
Once a year.
Oh, so we don't have to worry about that.
Great.
Great. Okay.
I saw you
All
two
right.
talking about it and thought they know.
Okay. So I just wanted to say that
Good
we'll
question.
be there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Vice Mayor, did you have anything else to add? So you turn on your mic and turn it off.
I just wanted to thank the officers for your presence tonight. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Council, I just wanted to update you all. The Civil Service Commission met 2 weeks ago, and there was some consideration at the end about, there's no solution to this at this point, but because of the way things progress through the hiring process for those members of city staff that would go through this process, oftentimes a lot of those decisions have played out because of people falling off the list by the time they come to the Civil Service Commission. And I think this is an issue that is acute now because of sort of the issues with hiring. So there's no solution to it now, but there will be some conversations between myself and other members of the Civil Service Commission and the chiefs, city staff, to see if we can figure out probably more meetings is what it means, but we will see. So that is the only update I have for you all. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yeah, Councilor.
I have a question. It's on behalf of Councilor Gabriel. He asked Councilor Shumway and I to help with the interviews for the board of the Recreation Board.
Great.
And but Councilor Shumway is going to be gone. I would like to not have to worry about leaving that late. So how about if people reach out to, or you could just let us know if you'd be willing to do 4:15 tomorrow. Is that right, Councilor Gabriel?
Correct.
Any members available at 4:15 tomorrow? I am not. Okay. We may have an issue at that time where no members are available. City Clerk?
If we did it by Zoom.
I can do it.
If we,
Do we just need two?
We got it.
we needed 3.
We have 3 now.
I can do it.
Counselor Cumby will step in. So me and Counselor Cumby and Counselor Gabriel.
Oh, okay.
We got it. Thanks.
I thought you were trying to.
I would mind if somebody else could do it, but it's fine. I can do it.
You could participate via Zoom, I imagine.
Yeah, I was going to offer that. I could ask Ryan if we could set up Zoom meetings to.
I would need to do it
have
Zoom.
You need to do it Zoom. Okay, I'll set that up in the morning.
Thank you, City Clerk.
And that's 4:15?
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Mayor.
You're welcome.
City Manager.
One last thing I forgot to mention, you just remind me, our Urban Renewal Authority ad is out on the street for folks to staff that board. So if you know people who have those expertise dictated in statute, finance, real estate development, those kinds of things, please encourage them to apply. We're hoping to put together a real power group there.
Thank you, City Manager. Okay. Seeing no other updates, we will close the work session. Thank you, everyone, for your time this evening. We don't have an agenda to review, so we skipped over that, so you all know. Board meetings next week.